And we are live. Hello, friends, and welcome to a live stream hosted by the Story Engine and Lore Masters deck, where we're going to be discussing how to make great tabletop RPG settings. I am especially excited about this stream because we have some really wonderful guests who represent different perspectives on world building, from game designers to artists to little old me, and I'm just really excited to get into the conversation and yeah, talk about world building and specifically talk about what makes a tabletop RPG setting different from creating a setting or a world for, say, like a novel or something more linear. I think there's a lot of stuff to get into. But first, I would love for you to meet our wonderful panelists who are joining us today. So, Connor Alexander, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Connor Alexander, citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I'm the owner of Coyote and Crow Games. And our first game, Coyote and Crow, the role-playing game, was on Kickstarter back in 2021. Since then, we've come out with a series of 10 adventures for it and a story guide screen and some dice. We had a smaller dice game come out called Nasi. That's a game within the world of Coyote and Crow. And then we're currently kickstarting our first sort of standalone board game called Wolves, which is a semi-cooperative game about community survival. It has sort of a fairly unusual end objective, which is that all players have to cross the finish line in order for there to be an individual winner. If any one player fails to meet its community's needs, everyone loses. So there's sort of a semi-co-op thing, and then there's a win condition at the end for an individual as well. And that's on Kickstarter right now, and we're really proud of it.
Wonderful. And Eren, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Eren Angiolini. I am a TTRPG illustrator and comic colorist. I have worked on many very famous IPs when it comes to comics. Critical Role is one that probably most of you will be familiar with, and Justice League, Doctor Who, Warhammer 40k. And the past 2 years and a half, probably actually since COVID and quarantine, I've decided to try working more in TTRPGs, like for my own passion for a long time. And I was like, I'm not sure if I can do this. I'm not sure if, I belong, blah, 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 blah. And then I, luckily, thanks to some friends who encouraged me, I jumped into it, started doing TTRPG character commissions, and I opened my Patreon, which is called the ArtVenturing Guild, on which I create character portraits in batches of 10 every month, a theme that my Patreon decides with me. And basically now I am taking the next step after my ArtVenturing Guild. I am creating the Arcane Compendium, which is my campaign that is currently running on BackerKit, and it's taking those characters and making a system agnostic character deck with all those cool ideas and concepts. Each character has a portrait and a bio that is super flexible and adaptable to any fantasy setting that you like. So it can be D&D, it can be Pathfinder, any system. And yeah, it's currently running. We have reached our main funding goal, and we are now headed for stretch goals, which is very exciting. And I'm very happy to be here with you.
Yeah, congrats.
Congratulations, that's huge. And Miroki, can you introduce yourself, tell the people who you are? I know many people have met you already, but...
Yeah, at this point, what's the point? Can I just stand Connor and Eren instead and just talk about how amazing their projects are? And I have also let Eric, our community manager, know, who's running all our comments for this live stream, to throw up both Connor and Eren's links. I think what I'll say, Eren, first of all, congratulations on hitting your funding goal. And I think given that Peter and I, along with Jordan Shively and Alina Pete, did this use the Lore Masters deck to use the Lore Masters deck to create our own campaign. I can't remember, a couple weeks ago, I want to say it is now. Time is passing so fast, I can't even keep track. But I was so obsessed with creating visuals, and the fact that you have the opportunity to create visuals using your system, I think, is awesome. So, okay, really quickly about myself. I think most of you all know. Hi, my name is Miroki Tong. I am some form of, recovering performing artist. After 10 years in the industry, I moved into the land of business, and now I get to scratch my creative itch by joining Story Engine Deck as CEO. So super excited to be a part of this amazing company and kind of being back in the creative field. When I'm not crunching spreadsheets by moonlight, I am writing about wine under the Instagram 9 ounces please, and I co-host a radio show on AM 640 in Toronto called Tasting Together, which is through the Global News Network. And I don't know. Oh, I guess I like do some circus and opera metal too. So that's sort of what I do. But of course, what's most important right now is that I am putting all my gusto and energy and apparently also opera metal into Lore Master's deck, which is live right now. And we have, I think, 5 days left. That's 10. This is like 2 hands of 5 days left to the end of the campaign. And we appreciate everyone who's been joining all the live streams to date, sharing the good word. And of course, all our backers, because you guys are literally the fuel that keeps the engine going in Story Engine and Lore Master Sex. So thank you for joining a live stream. I know live. I've not had enough coffee, guys. Okay, you're gonna get some really weird words from me. Maybe this is me playing with Lore Master's deck too much, and now I've just invented language of my own, like Shakespeare. But I know Connor and Aaron, we have had so many folks send us questions throughout this entire campaign, asking about how to create TTRPG settings. Even when we were creating ourselves, they're like, "Well, it's great that you guys are creating a setting, but like, how to inform us to create a setting? We don't know where to start." And we've been focusing a lot on Dungeons and Dragons, but they were like, "Well, what about smaller settings? What about independent settings? What about spaces outside of kind of the conglomerate D&D land?" And so I think today we're going to have so much to discuss. I know we have lots of questions on our end that we want to share with you. If everyone has questions in the comments, please drop them in. We will try and address as many of them as we can. This is the opportunity to have 2 experts, Peter 3 experts. I will fully admit that I'm probably the most novice out of everyone, so I'm as eager as everyone else to learn from the masters of all things TTRPG. So let's roll right into it. I think this is probably the broad scope question, but what took you into the world of world building, whether in tabletop RPGs and other creative forms? Anyone, jump in.
Connor.
Edit, you go first?
Oh, okay.
Sure. I think from early on, I was exposed to a lot of science fiction and speculative fiction television. I had a sort of an uncle who played an older brother role, and he was really big into getting me into both board games and then classic sci-fi, things like Star Trek, Twilight Zone, all that stuff. So I think really quickly when I started to read, and my grandmother was also a librarian who enforced reading upon me at a very early age. When I started to read, it was never enough when the book was done, especially when it was a series, right? Like if it was a series that chapter finished, I immediately began imagining what the next adventure for that character might be. And it always stayed in my head, these sort of imaginary adventures, these sort of things just sort of rolled around in my brain until somebody introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons in 1980. It was, dating myself a little bit there, but and then from there, because I wasn't a big fantasy kid up to that point, like I wasn't one of the kids that grew up on Tolkien. I was more of a sci-fi kid. But that, like knowing that world existed or a mechanism existed to roll these stories out of my head and collaboratively sit around with my friends and make these new adventures, it snowballed quickly. I mean, it wasn't long before I was eating up all of the other TSR offerings like Gamma World, and then growing into things like Rifts and Vampire the Masquerade. And they sort of became an extension of what I like in board games as well, which is I love thematic board games. I want to feel involved and engaged in the world building. Good mechanics are always fun, and I love that in a board game, but I want to feel like I'm in that world.
Great answer. And I gotta say, just the initial look that I got at Wolves, the bringing in gifting economy as a mechanic that is also like a social mechanic, is very cool. And again, a way of tying culture and world building and mechanics together, which is like when game design is just going, chef kisses all right. Yeah. So excited to explore that. And Aaron, what did your pathway to world building look like?
For me, I was definitely one of the kids that grew up with Tolkien, so I'm probably I'm the other example. I mean, I've been reading fantasy books throughout. Like The Hobbit was the first book that was that I read on my own after my parents had read it to me when I was a kid, and I grew up reading Lord of the Rings and like all the kind of like anything that had a dragon on it or like an elf or like fantasy woods or something was my bread and butter. And my way of jumping into world building was probably through illustration and through character design and just like creating like I drew a character and then I thought, oh, like this character has this incredible story and this, and like the, you know, as many of us probably, I have started at least 15 epic novels throughout my childhood. Like, no, this one I'm definitely going to finish writing this one. This is definitely happening. And it's just like, I still have books and books and books of notes with, you know, ancestry trees and like heroes of legends and stuff like that, and that kind of developed even more into what is now my huge passion for character design and creating OCs, original characters. And then when I was about 15, 16, and forums were still a very big thing at the time, I learned about role playing in forums. So like we will role play like fantasy Lord of the Rings inspired settings, and there were like no specific rules. Like there was a person who was telling a story and we were interacting with it in a very kind of like relaxed, very chill vibe. And then with these people we did a few meetings and they were like, do you want to try and play Dungeons and Dragons? And I had heard of it but I'd never played it before. And so my first D&D games were with the 3.5, and we had like a few occasional one-shots. And then a friend told me about LARPing, and this is actually how I really got a lot into role play. I was a theater kid, so it was a very easy step from theater kid to LARPing, and did many years of that. So it was like so much fun, just like creating all backstories. And I was one of the people like in the core group creating like the backstories for the different peoples and the different armies. And so like, oh yes, the elves, 45 pages of useless background that no one will ever read, but I loved writing it. And yeah, so that was kind of like my start. And like many from like when I was 15, 16 to 22, 23. And then for many years, I actually stopped throughout uni. And when things, thanks to like Critical Role and the other like big shows and like kind of like the rebirth of mainstream in a bit of a, like the TTRPG universe and like all these new realities, all the indie stuff that came out, all the you know the smaller worlds that you were saying before, all the other things that are not just D&D that came up. And I was just like, oh, what if I went into this again? And from there it was just a joy to rediscover this universe of universes and just jump back into it. And it's been wonderful. I'm very, very glad that I took the step.
Yeah, there really is a special yeah, I mean the cliche word is magic, but like there is like an energy that wakes up, I think, when you get into that flow state of putting a world together and it starts to feel real to you. And then there's that second layer of it that happens when a player enters it and it becomes real in a way where it's not just in your head, like someone else is interacting with it. And it's a very like Tinkerbell coming back to life moment of like, oh, you can like do magical and amazing things. But Miroki, your pathway to world building has been interesting because you've always been a geek. You've always loved fictional worlds, but you had your first roleplay experience live on stream with us like a week and a half ago. What has it been like, I guess, to like be thrown into the deep end with tabletop RPG role playing and building and being part of a world?
Yeah, if Connor and Aaron, you ever have time and want to check out the D&D campaign, I was thrown in like that. I literally have never played D&D in my life. I got as far as drawing and creating character when I was 14, and to now and never again. Like I never even played that character, to like doing a full 5-hour campaign with 3 very experienced campaigners. And I even had this moment where about like a day or 2 before the campaign, messaging Peter and going, Peter, I'm so sorry. I am way in over my head. I do not know how to design this character. Like I'm looking at this character sheet and there's numbers and they're telling me to roll a dice or something and I have to balance something. There's 8,000 races and species. I'm trying to research them all. I'm very confused. Please help. but it went fine. I think I survived. People said kind things to me, which I will take. I don't know what they're actually thinking, but I will take the kind things. The interesting thing is like, as I listen to you guys speak about your history in RPG settings, I am reminded of even just when we're children and when we play by ourselves, we have a tendency to role play by ourselves all the time. You know, I actually remember holding up my teddy bear and pretending to be my teddy bear as they speak to me and I speak to them. So perhaps inherently we've always role played a little bit in our lives as we try and found like either to kind of anthropomorphize our favorite toys and growing up, or maybe we wanted to play, we didn't have a friend or you know, a sibling available to play with us, or maybe we just didn't like them enough and we thought our own world was a lot better. And then I remember like when I was 12 years old joining Yahoo groups to role play in those forums. Yeah, bringing back the Yahoo groups. So I think it's always been an integral part of our lives in some way. I think I've always approached it in a very loose format, and I was always very intimidated by the structures of the games like D&D, and I think it's because systems like, at least for my for me, D&D was just, I could tell they were doing their absolute best to have as many, like recreate real life in some ways, right? Like that you didn't have control, that there were uncertainties, and that's where dice came in, so that you couldn't control the outcome of your situation. And as a control freak, I did not like that. I wanted the story to go where I wanted it to go, damn it. So it was very hard for me to embrace the system in that way. However, with the advent of smaller systems, like Connor, I took a very quick, you know, a very brief look at your campaign leading into the live stream today, and it was actually systems like yours where there's a bit of more finiteness, a little bit more contained, a little bit more of a contained game that started making things appealing to me once again, because it, for me, then kind of removed it from myself. It was more like, well, I don't need to be the one that's like obsessively wanting to create something of my own, which then of course you would sort of attach more and more of yourself to it, which then my desire to control increases more and more. But here am I able to sort of jump in to a game and participate and just sort of allow myself to be taken through follow the purpose of what is structured out for me, and then knowing that it's going to end sometime and I can like set it aside and go away. So it was actually smaller and independent systems. And and you can correct me if I'm completely wrong, because this is going to be my novice sticking out. Like, I think yours is a little bit more like a game where there's a setting involved in the play, as opposed to being like, I'm a TTRPG game straight up. Correct me if I'm wrong right now, so that
absolutely. Wolves is a standalone board game. Coyote and Crow, on the other hand, is far more of an open universe tabletop role-playing game, classic. So Wolves definitely, I hope at least people get the vibe and the theme and the feel of being in a small agrarian community, but it's very, compared to a classic tabletop role-playing game, it's very world light.
I was going to say your statement, Miroki, about that, like the control freak waking up. I think every world builder has some amount of the control freak, where part of why we do this is because it's a space where we have control and where we feel safe and where we can make like decisions about how we want the world to be, or making statements about how the world is, even if it's not the way that we want it to be. But I think there's something about creating for a tabletop RPG where you have your moment of it's all yours, and then you have to hand it over to other people to play in. And I was going to because Connor, I know for you had to leave a lot of notes about, like, if we have white players who are going to be stepping into an Indigenous world, playing Indigenous characters, there's going to be a lot of, like, cognitive dissonance. There's going to be some things where, like, they may role play in ways that are, like, problematic or, like, tricky. What is it like setting players up to step into a world that you've created and then to take it away from there, knowing that's where the control freak has to let go, and that at that point it's the storytellers taking over? Like, what does that feel like for you?
Rough. Let me tell you, it is rough. I think, early on in playtesting, it was very apparent early on that most of the people I was playtesting with were non-native early on, but were also very conscious of wanting to be respectful of me, in general, good allies to Native Americans. Like they were going in there with a good heart. But I think that intention, when you're not Native or just if you're any marginalized group, the people who are not part of that marginalized group can sometimes put up too many barriers. They can kind of wall themselves in because they're afraid of offending or they're afraid of crossing some sort of boundary that they're not aware of. And I completely get that impulse. But for me, at least, role-playing games are about imagination and extending yourself and pushing yourself a little bit out of your own comfort zone and exploring, worlds that you might not otherwise. So I tried to word it. I think I was somewhat successful. I tried to word it in the book in a way that I wanted players to fully engage with the material and just forget what they know about Native Americans. Just push that aside. You do not need to know anything about Native Americans to play this game if you are not Native. And I think the less you bring in that you think you know, the better off you are, right? Because I think a lot of things people think they know are misinterpretations or just incorrect. So hopefully, if people just play from the book and play from the page, there's plenty of imagination to be found there. But to be honest, it's still frustrating for me, and I still often have conversations with. I mean, we have a whole channel on our Discord, on the Coyote and Crow Discord, called "Is This Okay?" Because there are people continuously coming in with questions of, can I be doing this? And thankfully, we have a fantastic fan base that's very friendly and open about having those kinds of conversations. So I think it will get better over time. But I think it's not just role-playing games when it comes to Native Americans. I think in general we need broader media penetration to non-Native audiences. There's shows like Reservation Dogs out there or Rutherford Falls that have really good, authentic Native representation. And while Natives love to see that, I think it's even more important that non-Natives see it, because they can get a more accurate glimpse into the lives of Native Americans. And I think we need that for all marginalized folks, really. I mean, I want to see more characters in television and films that are just non-binary or trans or whatever it is, and just have them be themselves and not have the story be about that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Connor. I come from the acting industry. I was an actor and a producer for 10 years. And actually one of the reasons why I left is because I burnt out from the lack of diversity. And literally every role that paid my bills was Asian woman in a business suit. I wore the same one on set all the time. It would start stinking. I didn't care. Or Asian woman in scrubs. Those were my two roles that paid my bills. So then the ones that are always prolific, it's like, let's have the immigrant story, right? It was like the first start of prolific ones. I mean, Kim's Convenience is brilliant. I'm not going to discount that, but it was about the immigrant story. And it's always about like, I'm queer. Here's my queer story. And it's like, can you just
my sad queer story, or like
my
struggles. Yeah.
My struggle. Exactly, right? And actually, I don't know if anyone's seen that new animated film that came out, Nomura, I think it's called. Yeah, and it's not much of a spoiler, but the main character is gay and has a boyfriend, and that's just like there. It just sort of exists, like no one questions it. It's just integrated part of the world, and I was like, yes, thank you, because this is who we are. We're just individuals in the world doing our own thing. So yes, sorry, I had to chime in there because it meant a lot.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
And I think a lot of the kind of the craft of world building involves leaving room for people to find and see themselves in the world. So like different spaces where they can interpret their identity through different lenses or feel safe experimenting with that. One thing that I'm really curious about, Eren, with the compendium, with your work, when you're creating characters, how much are you dropping them in as like sort of wholly realized people with like details that might attach them to lore? How much of that is like a container in which a person can pour themselves and find themselves and like they bring the identity to the character? What has that process been like?
Good question. So I'm trying to have so for those who don't know, so the characters in the deck will have a portrait, like a cool artwork of what they look like, and then at the back there is a selection of information, like a little guide, and I wanted to keep that as open but like as possible, but still provide like a guide, a useful guide. So there is like literally 3 lines of background, personality. There is a flaw, a goal, a secret, and a fun fact about the characters. And what I wanted with that was to provide people with a base. So like whether this is an NPC for your next campaign, or whether it is the random encounter that you hadn't planned and you're just fishing it from the deck, or whether it was, let's do a fun one shot in which we play something at random that we don't really know. And I wanted it to be something that people can pick up and understand the character, but that doesn't dictate the path for their characters. So there are some characters, for example, in the deck that have dark pasts, or there are probably villain adjacent, but nowhere in the card does it say that they are actually villainous or that they are redeemed. So like I wanted to be like someone who gets this character card, I want them to be able to decide or like see in those hints and in those plot hooks whatever they wanted to see. So like there's something that could be, there is a fun fact for some, could be like one of the characters is vegetarian. Like, is that something that plays a very big role in their life, or like does it mean that they have like a very strong connection with animals, or like their morals and stuff like that, or is it just like they really like veggies? And like it's fully up to you to decide it. At the same time, there is characters that have hints to maybe a romantic story, or like something that they have like a big mission. So there is the difference between the goal, which is the open thing, that like the adventurer that is looking for that specific goal that is hidden in the mountain or something like that. And then there's kind of like the secret goal of like they're actually looking for it because there is supposed to be a necklace that belonged to their mother. And so like when does that thing come out? Is it something that they will openly share, or is it something that is kept secret and it's very personal? And so like I just wanted to make sure that everyone had a chance to take that guide and then turn it into whatever they wanted, and not it be like a strict, this is exactly how this character is meant to be rolled. It's just what informed my decision to make it system agnostic, other than all the things that we had to go through at the beginning of the year with D&D and wizards and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That was kind of like, okay, I had already thought, maybe just staying away would be a good idea. And then that happened. I was like, yes, staying away is a very good idea. But I also wanted people to see, like, when you see the character art, and like, I tell you that character is a druid or an herbalist. Druid in the person that has knowledge in herbs, not druid as a class, for example. And I wanted people to just decide, is this person maybe a warrior? They don't look like a warrior, but they could still be a hero. They could be, someone who goes and adventures and does whatever they want. Or maybe they're a shopkeeper. Maybe they're something else. And I didn't want the image or the text to dictate necessarily the direction. I wanted people to be able to just have a name, a couple of ideas that are more of a helpful thing when like you're describing the character and you don't know what words to use. And so it's like shopkeeper, or like maybe they're a fabric merchant or something like that. But that doesn't tell you, oh, they are definitely absolutely a druid or a this or a that or whatever, a Pathfinder, D&D, any other system. I wanted people to be free to just take that and then improvise, which I think like is the creative soul of any role-playing game.
Yeah, I know for me, when I was writing characters for the one shot that we did. So, and just to quickly summarize, because I know some folks were not around for this. So we did a live stream on a Friday where we created a setting using Lore Master's deck, entirely improvised. The chat gave us our notes on which cues they wanted us to use. And then over the weekend, I turned that into an adventure and a one-shot, a set of characters, sent the character briefs out to the cast who are going to be playing. And I had come up with like, okay, here's your public agenda, here's your private agenda. Because I love what you said about like having a secret agenda for every character on top of the overall goal. I think that makes for really interesting dynamics, for interesting choices that the player has to make and the character has to make. And the thing that I found was that every player invariably found their own way to navigate that secret public dynamic, and brought the living ecosystem of gameplay changed the way that they interacted with the world. An example of this, there's I think two great examples. One was Miroki's character Nam, who was this very closed off frost tiefling who was being sent by a siblinghood of seers who were concerned about the end of the world and had some secrets of their own. And Nam, who had been very untrusting, had actually seen a character who she'd been traveling with, who was like kind of a weird, gross necromancer. Their name was Phaedriel, and they were kind of stuck together as like unlikely roommates, unlikely pair. And they've been very like, neither of them had been sharing with each other. But throughout the combats, Phaedriel ended up kind of like using a spell that damages some people and heals another person, Wither and Bloom, and healed Miroki's character. And Nam developed this kind of like grudging respect. I wouldn't even call it like respect or appreciation, but like stopped hating them at the very least. And in a climactic moment, just before they went into battle, Miroki had this great monologue as Nam deciding to share the secrets of the siblinghood, which I didn't know that she was going to do. I hadn't counted on that. But that actually queued up the combat to play out differently, and actually ended up setting up Nam for this huge character turn in the final act of this like galaxy brain moment of reconnecting with a part of herself that used to like do crazy gambits and used to hope more. And we saw this character transformation that was entirely brought by Miroki having space to interpret the character. It was amazing. And at the same time, the thing that like all the best gifts in roleplay are things that you didn't expect people to bring to the table, and they kind of find there and are made together. It's a very like button soup situation. Alina Pete was role-playing as Karga, who's this ranger tracker dwarf who is from the glacier that they're on, and who's I given a secret. This is now spoilers for the campaign, but I had given a secret agenda to that she wants to use this forge that lets you forge a wish to resurrect 4 people who died in her village who were poisoned by a research foundation that had come in and was doing some kind of reckless experimentation. However, throughout the campaign, she had seen this necromancer twisting these vile mockeries of life for the purposes of getting them up the hill and defeating their enemies. And they decided by the time they reached the forge that like that's no longer going to be their wish. They've seen what happens when you try and drag bodies back from the far side of death, and decided like that's no way to honor the dead, and ended up wishing that the dead stay dead and the living stay living. And I got like chills on screen. And then when we did these final like cutaways where everyone got 2 minutes to say what happens to their character after the adventure, everybody had a way of like bringing out new threads in the story that were there, because there was, I think that the success was that there was enough room in the world for people to each make their own decision as to what the world means. And I guess the question that I want to pivot to is like, how much world building is too much world building? How much is not enough? And I guess one of the guiding principles that I've been using, and I'd be curious for your thoughts on, is leaving enough room that it has not been pre-decided what the world means or who has control over what the world means, that there's room for people to decide that for themselves. So I guess when you are world building, how do you leave enough room for the player to come and I guess develop their own relationship in the world? What does that look like from a creative and process perspective?
Yeah, for me, really early on, I decided that not only was it a thematic fit for me, because I was trying to incorporate, I was trying to create a big enough sandbox, as it were, for all natives to be able to play, and because natives across North America have just as many different viewpoints and ideologies and backgrounds and heritages as there are natives, I really quickly decided that I don't like the idea of canon. Canon to me is I avoid it whenever possible. And in Coyote and Crow, we did set up a timeline of events, but in almost every instance of an event, we make it very clear that the events are subjective and that we're giving them to you from a point of view of a specific group or a specific person. All of the sort of the equivalent of like the monster manual for D&D, we call them legends and icons. Almost all of those are, we list them as, so somebody heard the story about this thing that's out in the woods and it kind of looks like this. And maybe we give it stats for this, but maybe those aren't the stats. Maybe they're more powerful or less powerful. I really don't like canon. It was one of the things that I first rebelled against with D&D, was feeling like, oh, these are the stats for a goblin. Every goblin you meet is exactly the same, and it has all of the exact same behaviors and traits right on down the line. I think that it got boring for me really quickly, right? There's not a lot of room to maneuver within that. And that I think is where most role players start going, ooh, I'm gonna make my own little fun goblin that has a weird personality and is different from the others. And that's hopefully that all role players kind of start to feel empowered by that, and it broadens them. I think playing just in the book can get stale pretty quickly.
Yeah. Let's say, Eren, you illustrated not the goblin from Critical Role. You illustrated a story about Not. Did you not? Am I remembering correctly?
Sorry, I think I'm lagging a bit. I don't know if it's just me.
I was just going to ask if do I remember right that you illustrated?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Are we all able to hear Eren?
I can hear Evan.
Okay.
I can't hear Peter.
Oh no. Am I audible to anyone else?
Yeah, I've got you, Peter.
I hear you.
Eren, why don't you?
Okay.
Why don't you refresh and reload?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Hopefully. Sorry for that.
No problem. Tech problems will happen. The goblins get into the tech, and we have to adapt, and the story goes on. I was just asking because I believe that you illustrated the comic for Critical Role. That's not storyline, not the goblin from the second campaign, I think. Anyway, I'm a big fan of Not.
I'm very sorry about this.
Oh no problem. If you want to refresh the page and load in again, we can have you rejoin the stream.
Yeah, Peter was saying if you want to refresh the page and load.
Right, can I just refresh normally? Is it just going to give me it? Okay.
Yep.
Let's go back to.
Now I've muted myself. I was just wondering, Peter, while we're waiting for Eren to join us again, there were a few questions that were posted to our forum, and I'm wondering if we wanted to throw them out quickly while we, or Eren seems to have returned. Eren, do you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. It was very weird because I think I could hear both of you, Miroki and Connor, but Peter was frozen, so I don't know what was happening. Terribly sorry.
No worries. Can you hear me now?
I guess not.
And now everyone's frozen.
Uh-oh.
We're just all frozen. One day we'll have some sort of lore setting that creates a story about just constantly like wizards or someone trying to talk to each other through projection. It's like, I can't hear you. You're frozen. Misinterpreted communications and all that. I'm surprised that we haven't, that something like that hasn't come out already, given the amount of times we've been using virtual platforms over the last 3 years. Okay, so we had a question from Yoshira posted on our forum about how do you keep track of all of the world building and what kind of softwares, programs, websites would you recommend or suggest using? Well, Yoshira, we have this thing called the Story Engine or Lore Master's Journal that we're hoping to unlock as part of our campaign. And if we book it, you can use the good old analog tactile way of writing down all your lore clusters. And that is totally me not shamelessly wanting to unlock the journal as part of our system. And it's, we built the sheets in a proprietary way so that it helps work the best with Lore Master's deck. But I think maybe I'm burying the lead here. And I'd love to hear your input too, Connor and Eren, when they come back in. I know we've sort of made some jokes, Peter, internally about how we've become masters of spreadsheets when it comes to developing lore. It's like, we were all creatives and we never thought Excel would be as big of a tool as it would be. But but we just all needed to be incentivized. And apparently the incentive is to create worlds. But I'd like, if you have other systems, Peter and Connor, I think I would love to hear them, and so would Yoshira.
On the more logistical side of things, I really rely a lot on both Basecamp and Google Docs. And I'm not going to say that those are pretty or poetic at all, but they're very functional, especially when I'm working with other writers. I really enjoy using Basecamp. It's simple for me. As a writer, and as when I'm doing solo world building, I've just started using World Anvil for my second book. And World Anvil, I'm still getting used to the tools, but it seems like there's a lot of great functionality there. And yeah, I'm assuming you like that too, Peter.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of World Anvil. I've got an account myself, and yeah, I find the tools helpful, and they have really good documentation too. So if you don't know things, there's a video for everything. And Janet and Demetrius are the founders of it, have been friends of the Story Engine.
Oh, good.
Big fan of World Anvil.
It helps me keep track of a lot of stuff, and I can get into a lot of detail with things, and then it helps me sort stuff, and I can find stuff easy again when I'm looking to go back to refer to a character or a location. It's worked really well for me.
Yeah. So Aaron, we're just discussing what we use to actually keep track of world building, which can, how it gets to that point where you're like, okay, I need to draw a map. What kind of tools do you use for keeping your lore organized?
These.
Oh, you're old school.
Old school, yeah.
I'm very old school. I love notebooks, and getting back into TTRPG was my excuse to finally use the to justify buying more notebooks, which has always been a huge. It's just like, oh, that looks really pretty. I'm gonna buy that, and then they were all on my bookshelves, and like, yes, but untouched, absolutely empty, and now I have an excuse to buy more, because for a time I was like, no, I can't buy them anymore because I'm not using them. And now I have an excuse, so I just buy more. I'm very much a pen and paper person. I do keep digital things for maybe more of an admin side of things, or just backups of everything and stuff like that. But other than the actual the drawings or stuff that I create digitally, everything else it helps me a lot to have a physical proof, or even a way of tracking things. Even when I work on comics, I have my other notebooks in which I keep track of everything, and I've done all the commissions, all the comic pages and everything. So I'm very much I've seen that there's a few other pen and paper people in the chat, and I'm definitely on their team.
Yeah, I think I mean the reason that I made the Story Engine and I like the physicalness of it is I do think that interacting with objects in physical space is a huge part of how our brains and bodies and memory works. We remember things better when we physically interact with them and touch them. I think that's why like with the compendium as well as a deck of cards, we're gonna be able to focus on that differently than we would if it was just a prompt thrown up on a screen. So yeah, I do love being able to write things down in notebooks and spatially organize them too. For me, I'm finding that's more and more that's how I create. And then when I need to log or document, that's when I end up going digital, because it's so hard with world building. It's such a non-linear process. So being able to interlink between different nodes of information, I have this location that's tied to these three things. I can link out to those articles so that I can update them there and click my way through my weird little mini Wikipedia that I've made for myself. Yeah, I like having a digital thing to log in myself. But I have so much respect for the old school notebooks and having to find the page. That's awesome. That's so awesome. But Connor, I feel like I cut off your thought early. You were talking about sort of that moment in D&D where you realize every goblin is the same stats, they all behave the same way, and that kind of creates a low ceiling for role play and world building and experience. So I guess what was your next step for and I think it's the classic homebrewer's journey of realizing this game there's some wonderful things about this game, and there are so many things that I think I could do better.
I think to some degree for Coyote and Crow is a bit of a unique situation in that creating this alternate timeline, I didn't want to be prescriptive about how specific real world tribes' alternate histories played out, right? So I had to create a sandbox that was large enough that if I had, an Ojibwe friend who wanted to tell the story of what happened to the Ojibwe people in this timeline, they could do that in a way that I was giving them that framework and that sort of openness. At the same time, you want to create enough specificity. It sort of goes back to Eren's cards that you want to give players a hook to dig into. It doesn't have to be clear. You don't have specific stats. But I do think you need some guardrails up there to at least sort of prompt the characters in the right direction, right? And then let them fill in the blanks. I think that's the tight wire, tightrope walk that we're all doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that leaving space for people to discover and determine things themselves, but enough to start with too, is like, yeah, it is that balance. I know for me, like writing prompts and cues for the decks, that is the thing that I'm always trying to figure out is how much is just handing them a finished thing, and how much is handing them a couple of pieces that they can assemble into something that's going to be cooler than what I would have pitched them anyway, and which they'll have a more meaningful relationship to.
Great. Well, just real quick, a great example that I had of this was I had somebody on Discord. The Discord asked me, you call out in the book that space travel is not a thing in the writing. I really wanted to do a space travel campaign and have my characters go into space. Is that okay? I said, well, look, specifically said that technology is there. It's just that the governments haven't explored it, and there hasn't been a lot of reason to go out into space. If your characters or in your saga that you've set up, you want to go into space, have a great time, do it. It's there. I specifically left that door open. I didn't wall it off. I just left the door there. If you want to walk through it, that is up to you. I love it when players try to break my own game. Like that's the biggest compliment I can have, is when players take my universe and go somewhere completely unexpected with it.
When the fan fiction is written. When the fan fiction is written.
Exactly.
And Eren, for you, what have those moments of like D&D gets you this far, but there's a moment where you're like, I want to build my own thing, or I want to build off of that. What were some of the steps that you took, I guess, to be able to put your own stamp or your own spin on the characters or the worlds or the setting stuff that you were creating?
I think for this, it was I need to thank my patrons, because they've allowed me to take something that I wanted to do for fun and make it sustainable, and also make it fun and collaborative, because it's just like a wonderful occasion. Basically every month I give them 3 options of like themes, and they vote the one that they prefer. So like it could be like next month's theme will be undead creatures and characters, and then so they have a few days to vote for that, and then I have a few days to pitch me character ideas. And so they have kind of like a one-liner in which they give me like a undead merman that has a big battle scar, or maybe like a very funny and a joyful undead gnome that just goes around and sings all day and stuff like that. And it's just like, it's a great way for me to push myself out of my comfort zone and like do things that I've never done before, or like that I haven't done as much, whilst also giving, of course, my supporters what they want and what I would like to see, but also what they don't expect. Because it's such a, like, one of my favorite comments that I see is when I take a prompt and then I create a character and they say, wow, I had not imagined this. Like it's fun to see how it often, even from a very specific sentence, like they give me something and I get something else, and they're like, oh wow, I hadn't imagined it going this way, or like it's just so rewarding to see how collaborative and creative people are, and it's very nurturing and very motivating for me. And it's, I don't know, it's a process that I love, and that I just surprises me every time that I go through it, and it's just a joy. So for me, my patrons have been a huge help in making this happen. And on the other side, it was kind of like yes, I grew up being exposed to a lot of role playing and theater and stuff like that. But when I first jumped into the D&D world, because that back in the day for me it was D&D, like, and Vampire the Masquerade. Those were like the two. I was born and grew up in Italy, and at the time when I was a teen, those were the two option other than role playing, like LARP. So like when you did LARP, you had your own stories, your own things, and all of that. But when you were role playing, it was D&D or Vampire the Masquerade, and they were two very strong pillars. And you had to have all the books, and you had to know all the things in all the books. And that was a huge obstacle for me because like it cost money, it was a lot of things to learn. It was a lot of things to understand, and especially as someone who was doing D&D very occasionally and sporadically, it was very difficult for me to just like remember everything and learn everything and have everything. So it was a very kind of like one-way road, and now just getting back into it, it was just like how much wider this world has become, and has given me the freedom of saying, yeah, okay, I love D&D, I love this and I love that, but what if I did this other thing? And like all my ideas for my original characters, I recently released an actual D&D homebrew lineage that came out from like, I want to make a character that looks like this. And it's like, would they be a Genasi? Would they be this other thing? It'd be cool to share it with my friends. And it's just like, people ask me, what is this character? Where did it come from? And I'm just like, sure, I could come up with that. And so it's great to sometimes stick to those rules and build on top of them and use them as a guide. But it's also great to just be free to step away from them and not be, oh, you're the weird ones so you don't know everything, or like, oh, why are you doing that? And I'm very happy that we are in this new phase of RPGs in which that is not only beautiful and welcome, but encouraged, because I think it's where the beauty of the community is coming from.
There's something that you, Peter, I'm just going to give a quick comment here just because I know I have to dash off really quickly for a few minutes, everyone. But I think that point you made, Eren, specifically about the financial constraints of participating in a specific world of role-playing is something that I think we don't discuss. Sometimes we talk so much about the creativity or what we should not do, but there's a very practical element that stops people from joining particular systems, and cost is a big one of them. And the option of people being able to homebrew, deviate from their own systems, generate their own systems, or something that's just a little more shareable with the community at large, I think is like one, I think, of the reasons why we move in that direction, outside of even just that, like, oh, I want to create my own thing. I know even with, I'm going to use just our example, just something I witnessed myself with the Story Engine community. We have a great third-party kind of fan-run Discord group, and even a Facebook group of collectives of people who've taken the system into their own hands and created their own guides and products that they have kind of made open source and shared with each other. And I think, Peter, and I think you two as well, like Connor and Eren, I think we all have, I think as creatives, have some sort of, I think like internal mandate or mission that we want to make these things, we're trying to, as accessible as possible to the world at large. We have to find a way to do it in a way that, pays our bills and make sure that we can continue to keep a roof over our heads and feed ourselves something other than canned beans while we create all the things that we want. And, obviously, like, I am the quote unquote most capitalist of the group here. I'm constantly I'm the budget cruncher and I think of the sheets, but I think business sustainability is something that we don't think about often enough, and something I do try and make sure that we stay on track of. And I mean, that's the reason why we have kind of PDFs to try and make things more, PDFs of the deck to make things more accessible if people want to kind of print their own, if the hard copy is not necessarily something that is viable for them at this time. But before I hop off, I guess, like, just to quickly because I know we have so many more questions coming in. I know you guys are going to do some cool stuff when I step away. Just to reset anyone who's joining us for the first time, since we're about an hour into the conversation at this point. We're Lore Masters Deck on BackerKit. We are joined today by Connor Alexander, the owner of Coyote and Crow Games, and also has the game Wolves live on Kickstarter at the moment. And then we also have Eren Angiolini. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes.
Eren Angiolini joining us today. They are an incredible colorist who has worked for some very, very prolific titles, including Doctor Who and Critical Role. I was like, Critical 20? No, it's Critical Role. So this is my memory. And they also have a campaign live on BackerKit right now that you can check out. They just funded, they're moving towards their stretch goals, called Eren's Arcane Compendium of Characters. So we're really, really thrilled to be having them bring their expertise on how to build better TTRPG settings And if you guys have burning questions, please, of course, drop them in the chat. Drop them. We have them in our forum board that I will try and bring back as much as we can. I am jumping away for a few seconds, so it's not the goblins getting me this time. I am moving of my own autonomous will, but I'll see you all back very shortly. I'm excited to see what you guys all discuss for the next few minutes.
See you in a bit.
Amazing. See you in a bit. So actually, I'm going to do a quick bit of synthesis here, just because I love walking away from conversations with like, these are the things that I'm going to keep in mind. If there's 3 things that I'm going to remember as I walk away, it's these. I think that one, actually, why don't we each pick one? If there's going to be like one piece of advice that you'd synthesize and say like, hey, here's the like nugget I'd hold on to from this conversation that you'd want to pass on to other world builders. I'll give you a moment to think about that while I pitch mine. And I think that specifically when it comes to creating a good tabletop RPG setting, my like one nugget of advice would be that normally in world building, it is about the control freak. It is about having all the details and putting them in place and mastering them. I think that for a tabletop RPG, letting go is actually the muscle that you need to start working. Letting go of control, letting go of the need to decide how the world is going to be used, and thinking of it more as like you're setting up a playground. This is not a movie, or like this is not actually. Here's a good example. It's not a theme park ride where someone's on the rails and they're going to follow exactly where your story goes and they're stuck in the car. You're setting up the whole playground, the whole wonderland. And you want to create as many stations that have like a variety of different activities or options or meanings where people can go and invent things to do. And I'd say that learning to let go instead of to like hold on tight is probably one of the things that I'd recommend world builders practicing as a mindset if they're going to start creating worlds, not just to tell like a fixed story like a novel or comic in, but to tell a story that's going to leave room for people. So that's my sort of synthesis nugget. But Connor or Eren, what would you say is like if there's one thing that you want people to walk away with as advice for how to level up their world building specifically for role play?
I would sort of parallel yours. I would say create just enough of a world that you generate questions, not answers. So have people read whatever you've done or put down whatever you put and say, hey, I've got questions about this. And if you've given them enough information that they can create their own answers, you're doing a good job. It should inspire those questions, right? Like, well, if this is true, then what about this? That's great. You're on the right track if they're asking for them.
I love that. Yeah, I love the roles of questions in world building.
I'll have to agree. I think what Connor was saying earlier about also like not thinking that for you is also like a cultural thing is like, no, you don't have to know everything, and it's actually good if you don't know everything, and not like stepping in with like a set of ideas or stereotypes or like archetypes or anything that like you have to stick to, or that you have to expect, or that you have to absolutely follow step by step. I think that it's very important as people who open the doors to these worlds to give people, as you were saying, Connor, like the option of asking the questions, and then the freedom of finding your own answers, and like finding the wrong answers is fine. Like there's no it's the great thing about RPGs is that there is nothing that you can't do. It's just like that's the whole thing. We are making story ups. Exactly. There is no, there's maybe bad situations like in which the characters can find themselves, but that doesn't mean that you're playing it wrong. I don't like the idea of like having to stick to the thing because otherwise you're not doing it correctly. If you're having fun, if you're creating, if the people that are creating with you or on your own, if it's a solo game, if it sparks that interest, that passion, that curiosity, then that's it. That's the game. You don't have to win it. You don't have to win it. You don't have to defeat anyone. And of course, if you're a number crunching battle perfectly optimized and you like doing that, that's the thing for you. That's perfectly fine. That's the thing. Like I don't like when people say you have to know everything, but I also don't like when people say people that know everything are doing it wrong. It's like, that's the whole point. You do it in whatever way makes you happy, and that's the way to do it.
Love that.
Yeah.
Jasmine Buller, who's a really, really great Dungeon Master storyteller in the tabletop roleplay space, has a saying that she truly believes there's a table for everyone, which is to say that whatever it is that about roleplay that gets you really excited, if it is mechanics, if it is lore, if it is roleplay, if it is social experimentation, whatever it is, there's a way to build a table where that is the thing that's exciting and fun and valid, and all those tables are valid. Yeah, love that. Yeah, great, awesome. I feel like I've learned so much. Well, let's pivot into doing a little bit of actual world building live. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull out the alpha copy of the Lore Masters deck. There's some typos here and there. There's some little mistakes, but this is all about the letting go and sharing it with people and seeing what comes out of it. And the thing that I really want to do is sort of discuss which choices intrigue you as world builders and why. And specifically, if you're going to be prepping a session or a world or something for role play, and you're thinking about other people coming in, does that tweak the way that you would make creative choices? And I just feel like writing and creation can be such a lonely individual process that A, getting to do it together is going to be a lot of fun, and B, getting to verbalize the process that kind of happens inside is something that we don't get to see very often. And I love to encourage happening because I feel like we learn so much about how other people think and feel and create, and that's just a wonderful thing to have in your experience bank as a creator. What we normally do with the chat is we will let the chat vote on choices, and we will have our panelists discuss which choices and influence democracy by basically saying, like, here's the vision I have for this. And I think what I'll probably do is for each choice that we make, I'll put one of you in charge of the final decision, and you can take the chat's vote into account, but ultimately it'll be with one person for each of these things, and we'll all discuss our takes. All right, so I'm going to open up our little demo cam here and go to this view and get my face out of here. Amazing. Okay, so the Lore Masters deck, again, for those who don't know, the Lore Masters deck is a deck of 300 cards that can be used to create prompts for factions, figures, events, locations, objects, materials, and creatures in your world. And specifically, it's designed to, one card at a time, create creative prompts for one of these elements and then link it to other elements so that you kind of expand organically outward from one card towards others. And all of these cards meaningfully have a place in your world and are part of an ecosystem. And that's kind of the goal with it. And yeah, we're going to be doing some talking about world building using the alpha deck here. And let's, Eren, you're going to start us off. Do you want to create a creature, a material, an object, a location, a event, a character, or a faction? What do you feel like making to start?
Let's go for a character, because that's my specialty for now.
All right. So we are going to pick between one of 4 basic character types here. So we'll all discuss sort of what we find interesting, and the chat can vote on this. But to start us off, Ed, in terms of a character being a traditionalist, a wayfinder, a joker, or a machinist, which of these things are you vibing with? Where do you see a good storytelling opportunity here?
I like the wayfinder. That inspires me.
What do you like about it?
I think I like the idea of it being kind of like a stepping point for something else. Like a wayfinder is someone who is maybe curious or mysterious or adventurous. Like it to me, it can go in so many different directions. It's not just a thing. It could be any type of thing. Like, what's the reason why they're doing this, or like what's the goal, or the risks of what they're doing. It just immediately sparks a lot of different questions, as we were saying earlier. The questions are the key.
Yeah, Connor, is there anything that's whispering to you from the card here?
As far as the wayfinder, or any of the characters?
Any of them, yeah.
Traditionalist definitely calls to me. Traditionalist is really like, I wouldn't say I was thinking about it beforehand, but as soon as I saw all 4 choices, I latched on immediately. I think, especially when I'm talking with my fellow natives right now, there's always a lot of conversation around traditions versus modernity, old versus new. And I tend to like characters who, because I'm not a traditionalist, I tend to be drawn to characters who are then sort of put in positions of having to either defend their traditions or are being exposed to new things and being exposed to new situations that challenge their preconceptions.
Yeah, I love any character who comes with enough of a code that you know that pushing the boundaries of that code is going to yield some really interesting storytelling material. And I love worlds that change, and a traditionalist in a world that's changing is like a great recipe for like conflict and storytelling. Love those both. Well, Eren, this choice is up to you, and you can consult the chat if you wanted to see where the chat's going. But what do we want to work with here?
It's difficult. Let's go with Wayfinder, because I also see that some folks in the chat have asked for that. So let's see.
Awesome. All right, so our character is going to be a Wayfinder here. And now, Connor, you'll take lead on this one. So there's going to be 4 cues, which are going to give us details about this Wayfinder, some of which may require additional cards to connect to and learn more about. Sure. So this Wayfinder can have a background where they turned the tide in a major battle, and we'll draw an event card to learn more about that battle. They can have an agenda where they're trying to make friends with another figure. They can have a trait where they tire easily. Or we can have a trait where they're anti-authoritarian. We'll go in some ways opposite of traditionalist.
Chat, I like the idea of making friends with a figure. I think whether you're a Wayfinder or a traditionalist doesn't even matter for that scenario. For me, meeting new people and new human interactions is always the start for a great drama.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I love seeing how characters that were created in isolation just become different people around each other, or like new resonances come out. Love that. Eden, anything here speaking to you?
I also did like the make friends with a figure one a lot. I also like the tires easily, because I think that could be like a fun trait to explore. But I also really love the making friends with a figure agenda. I think that's a very interesting, compelling bit.
Yeah. I agree. There's good feel there. I'm always a sucker for someone who had a role in a historical conflict. There's something about that like I was like, well, wait, which side were they fighting on, and what were they fighting for, and who are they now? If that is like one of the headlines from their past. Yeah. So I'm a sucker for those personally, but we'll see what. Oh, hey, this is one of my players from the home game. C down is the maritime setting that I created for the home game. James, playing the surfer druid, who's part druid, part surfer, is trying to get spoilers for the game. It's actually good, because I occasionally mention home game spoilers when I'm talking about world building. So now I know there's players lurking. The figure could be a spirit or something even more fantastical. Yeah. So, and with the figure cues, you can interpret them widely enough that you could definitely interpret them as being non-human. Cool. Well, Connor, what do you want to go with here?
I think we're in agreement. I think we'd like to go with make friends with a figure.
Awesome. Alrighty, and then we're going to quickly draw another. Actually, we'll go sideways here. We're going to figure out who the friend is quickly before we move on and keep building out this card. Is their friend, and this one will be entirely up to the chat, but we can still influence votes by talking about our favorites. Is their friend a virtuoso, an overlord, an author, or an advocate?
This is an interesting one.
Yeah, I always like a virtuoso, because people who are really good at their craft are just, there's something inherently sort of interesting about that. But I also like the idea of like someone who's inherently problematic being someone that you need to or want to befriend for some reason. Is like, there's an interesting tension there, right? Like if they're trying to befriend someone who we want them to befriend, that can be an easy storyline, and that can work for sure. But there's something about them trying to befriend an overlord. Like, what does it mean to befriend an overlord that I'm finding intriguing?
And it's weird. I have an instant reaction to the term overlord, where I think of it in negative connotation. But I think that's my own personal baggage. An overlord wouldn't necessarily have to be a bad person, right?
I can't think of any good overlords myself, but I'm curious for.
Is there anything inherent in that definition that says they have to be a bad overlord, right?
No, we could definitely have like a benevolent dictator situation where like control is something that is important to them, but that doesn't mean that it's all of who they are, and also doesn't mean that they make bad decisions, Yeah.
I think there's some interesting room there, and it seems like some folks in the chat are down for overlord.
Yeah. All right. We'll call that one Overlord then, and we can pull that card out later and learn more about them if we want to. Well, let's keep going with our Wayfinder here. We're going to add some more traits. Eden, this one's coming your way. Do they have a background where they were involved in a terrible breakup with another character? Ooh, juicy. An agenda where they're trying to recover a lost possession, which we'd fill out with an object card. A trait where they're a skilled negotiator, or a trait where they have a noticeable fragrance.
Oh, that is so fun. Oh, this is very interesting because like the two that kind of like jumped at me immediately were like the trying to recover a lost possession, because that would be kind of like not only like the wayfinder is searching for something, and that might be the thing, and that might be the reason why they're trying to befriend the overlord, even if they might not be the nicest person around. And the other thing is also the skilled negotiator, because probably to befriend an overlord, you might need to be good at diplomacy. So those two I think would work really well, and probably they would make like more sense following our trail. But also the terrible breakup could be fun.
Breakup's always good material. It's always juicy. Connor, I think you're tickling your fancy.
So I had almost the exact same reaction. Both skilled negotiator and lost possession seem to play really well with what we've got so far. Mm-hmm. But I think that's almost the actual reason that I want involved in a terrible breakup, because it plays against everything. It's sort of a bit of chaos into the situation. I kind of like that.
Well, I'm going to introduce a new mechanic here that the chat's reminding me of, called the corner tuck, where if you like two prompts that are on adjacent corners, you can tuck them both like that. So both queues stay active. And we could have our cake and eat it too, so to speak. Adam, would you be cool with that?
Yeah, or I mean, or we could we have the recovering the possession and the breakup then, so like we have kind of like the more like straightforward path of going for something that we need, and then we kind of like give for granted that they're hopefully good at being a diplomat, or maybe not, and that's also maybe why they had a very bad breakup, because they were not very good at that.
Yeah, I love that. And a little pitch from the chat here. Going out on an adventure is a great way to get over a breakup, right? Totally healthy.
Absolutely. I think one of my D&D characters, exactly that. It's just like, but he had a bad breakup, and then so he's going away to not think about things.
I only recently, I think literally last night on the dog walk, listening to a podcast, found out that George Lucas wrote the story for Temple of Doom while going through a divorce after having been cheated on. So in addition to all the racist things about that movie, one of the very problematic things is a man's beating heart being ripped out of his chest and taken away from him, which I think may have been an example of someone trying to write an adventure as breakup therapy that brought some problems.
George Lucas. I completely believe that story. I absolutely believe that story.
Yeah. Anyway, fun little factoid that I found out. But I think, I like that pitch. So, Connor, this one's coming your way. Let's figure out what the possession is. Is it a crate, a pistol, a sextant, or a backpack?
Got to go with sextant. First of all, sextants are cool.
Yeah.
Second, it's a great word. It's just a cool word. Sextant's a cool. It like rolls off the tongue, right?
Yeah.
But also, it adds an element in that surprised me, which is a nautical element, right? I didn't expect that, and I wasn't picturing that, and I like that. I like the sharp left turn of the sextant.
And it gives the wayfinder, like, I think it ties into whatever it means for them to be a wayfinder. This is a tool for it. Especially if like I'm starting to think that maybe the overlord has it, and that's like a classic to get close to them. And then you have that great moment of like you're trying to gain the trust of someone, but you're doing it for a reason that you can't tell them about. Classic third act conflict of like you only befriended me because you wanted something. I think that's a thing that we could. We can keep that as one of our options for storytelling there. But again, part of the goal here is to leave things open for players. So I'm kind of seeing the wayfinder as maybe the NPC who's asking the party for help. This could be like a good adventure hook of like, and especially if they are like obviously reeling from a breakup and maybe in an emotional place where they're making decisions that they would not make otherwise. I love moments where the party starts to question, should we be helping this person, or are their motives something that we can support? Like I love a little bit of tension between the party and the NPC who's kind of like powering the quest along. All right, Eden, you're going to pick our breakup person here. So we have a wayfinder. Do they have a terrible breakup with an exile, a storyteller, a historian, or a mechanic?
An exile immediately.
Yeah, I was also vibing that.
Yeah,
I think there's something about like, yeah. I'm sorry. Where are you coming from with it?
I think it's very interesting because it like is it the like is the exile the consequence? Is the exile the reason? Is the exile because of something that they've done? Have they done something bad, or maybe they don't? Maybe this person is living in the country, the nation, the place where this overlord is reigning. So is the were they exiled by the overlord, or did they choose to? Maybe they are a good overlord, but the X does not agree with they actually being good, and maybe there are some shifty things hiding in the bag, and so they're like, I'm not gonna help you. Maybe they were in the government, or like they were a religious figure or something. They said, I cannot stay with you because I do not belong in this place as long as this other person, and so they were like, no, stay with me. Like, no, I have to go. And so that like they broke their heart because their morals, or like their background was impeding the what was between them. So that's
I love that, and I think it's such a good example of the value of asking questions. Like you come up with a bunch of different viable angles to approach this, and I guess a question for you then, as a follow-up, if you were putting together material for like a campaign one-shot, or like this is a setting, how much of that would you decide and write down, and how much of that, or how would you leave some of that open to the player who might be stepping into this?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would say, like, if I had a situation like this, I would try to understand what like the mechanics between the different characters are, and like maybe their like their reasons for doing what they've done. But I would try maybe and not assign a specific moral value to some of their decisions, and let the players experience that. So like um, this person left because either of a specific event, or like a specific behavior, or a specific calling, for example. And I would like to, like, I will have in my mind what that reason is, and like the fact. But I will probably try and leave the judging of the fact, or like my experience and my own personal thoughts, because first of all, I think whether it's good or bad, it's interesting to see the players discover that for themselves. So like to maybe this good overlord, it's very interesting to present them as that, and then let the players find out if they're actually a good overlord, or if there's something shady, or if maybe there wasn't anything shady and it was all in the players' minds, and like what drove them, and then to make specific decisions, and then to question said decisions maybe too late, after they have already taken a turn in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think that that suggestion that you had of like no judgment, go in with like being curious, I guess, curious about motives and answers, but not needing to decide those ahead of time is that's such a good way to approach that mindset. All right, Connor, you're going to bring us home with a last little cue for this character before we expand on one of these sides here. So this is still our Wayfinder. Do they have a background where they are responsible for destroying a location? An agenda where they're trying to repair the fallout of an event? A trait where they have a startling appearance? Or a trait where they are quick to anger?
Wow. It's funny how all of those all kind of tie together. They could all be interconnected there.
Yeah.
I feel like quick to anger leads to interesting character dynamics in the situations that we've set up so far as the breakup, as far as being friends with the overlord. But it does kind of also conflict with the skilled negotiator, which we did lock on the skilled negotiator on one of those corners, right?
I think we
ditched skilled negotiator.
I think we didn't, but something that I say with the deck is like you can always carry the cues that you covered up with you as thought fodder.
Yeah,
right? Like that can still be something that you bring to the character. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think quick to anger is the more interesting one there. Yeah, I'm gonna go with quick to anger. Although, quite frankly, I like all of those cues.
Aaron, are any of these speaking to you?
I like the idea of going with the trait as well, because so far we've done kind of like events or like background things. So I like adding, instead of necessarily adding like another step to the background or like the events that have come before. I like the idea of like defining either like with the appearance or the anger. I like that. I like that a lot. So yeah, I'm happy to go with that.
All right, Connor, we're doing anger, and then
real quick,
we'll get
for me. Appearance, to some degree, a lot of that depends on the setting. Like sterling appearance is a weird one for me because I don't want. I think sterling. I don't know where I'm going with this. I feel slightly off about sterling appearances depending on the setting that I'm in. That one kind of raises the question for me.
Yeah. I think it's inherently othering to have someone like, oh, you are not normal, and if we don't know the world, we don't know what that means.
Better word than I had there.
Yeah, I agree. That's one that I think I'd be more interested to look at when I know more about the world and have can make a more informed decision, I guess, about how it would play. But I can see. Yeah,
that's very interesting because for me, startling appearance when I read that, I thought it was like someone who was incredibly beautiful or like something that is just like, oh, when they get. I didn't think of it of like someone who does not belong, but someone who's maybe like a magnet or something like that. So it's very very interesting to see how like. Even from like the hints and like how open and creative
how we bring our own ideas to the table on these too.
Well, that's why doing these live streams has been invaluable for me, because getting to see people interpret things in entirely different ways, bring new lenses and takes on things, and to do that in real time is like I developed my decks during the pandemic for the most part, and so it was very lonely work, and I got to do playtesting, but it was in very sort of isolated pockets. And every time I get to see how, again, like people bring something new, collaboration, not being overly attached to what something means or how it's going to work, and letting go of the interpretation that maybe I had to see what someone else can do with it has been so much joy has come from those things, is what I'll say. And and again, like just like you said about being curious but not applying judgmental labels to things is like a really good way to find new meanings all the time. And it's such a hard mindset to like hold on to and reinforce, because our biases are so much a part of the way that we think. You can't just step out of them, right? Like they are there. And I think learning to acknowledge and counterbalance and try to catch them is the very least that you can kind of do. But do we want to learn more about the Overlord, the Sextant, or the Exile? I'll throw this one as an open question. Is there one of these characters or elements that you want to learn more about?
Is this to the chat or to us?
This is to you. I want the chat's perspective, but I think we'll be deciding with our experts here at the end.
Interesting.
I mean, I obviously want to hear from the chat some more, but I will say that I think the learning more about the Overlord could be really interesting in giving perspective to the relationship with the Sextant and why he's negotiating there and why he's befriending this Overlord.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that knowing more about the Overlord will inform us about the Exile possibly as well. So like knowing what type of person the Overlord is and what type of like connection or like situation they might have around them will inform us to on our Wayfinder and possibly about the Exile as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's do Overlord then. And this one we'll do the next one as we influence, but we'll go by chat vote. And we're gonna do when you are expanding a prompt in the Lore Masters deck, one of the ways that we help people physically track which card they started with and which cards connect to which cards is a new card type. It's the 8th card type. You don't use it in the first prompt, but you use it in every prompt after that. It's called the Wild card. So these are really simple one-word adjectives that just describe something about the character, and when you tuck them, they show you the direct line between this character connecting to this character, so that you can follow. You can later on, like if you just took a picture of this and you didn't have any of the cards later, you could see, okay, here's the card where I started. Here's how the web grew and fanned out, and it's just helpful for reconstructing your thought process and creative process. But we're going to pull out Overlord. We're going to orient Overlord so that the active queue is now facing us, the camera. That's how we know which queue we're using, and then we're going to go ahead and tuck. And I'm also going to. For a second, I thought we had Miroki back, but I think that she might be a moment longer. Okay, so here we go. Well, let's discuss which ones we find interesting, but the chat's going to vote. is this going to be a fragrant warlord, a glossy warlord, a desperate warlord, a posturing warlord, a heartless warlord, a dogmatic warlord, a whimsical warlord, or a translucent warlord, whatever that might mean? Any of those interesting to you? And Miroki, can you give me a little wave from backstage if you are ready to go on?
I used the power and broke the layout as a result.
No, we're good. Hold on.
No, we're good.
There we go.
Yeah, so we are discussing, we're pulling our first. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say the one that jumped out to me immediately was fragrant. Like, I want to know what an overlord smells like.
Actually, one little side nugget for like world building advice. Every time I set a scene in D&D, whether it's an improvised one or one that I've pre-scripted, pull in one sense that is not sight. Mention the calls of seabirds. Mention the heavy smell of like pine pitch burning soaked into the fireplace. Mention one sense that isn't sight, and I promise you, for like kicking up that level of immersion for world building, will really help, and it'll make you think about what else is in the scene that is creating that effect. Just little nugget that I had. So I'm a big fan of fragrant for that reason. What kind of fragrance?
I'm a big fan of trying to recreate actual scents in my play space if it's going to be a scent that's going to carry over for a while.
Yeah. And by that, do you mean I interpret that as like I sweat heavily at the table sometimes, and that's me physically recreating the smell in the place, especially if we're going to be there for a while.
I was thinking more like if they're in a forest, we'd have something pine scented, but yours works too. I love it.
Musky. That would be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sense memory, like smell-based memory, is so strong. There's something about smell and memory that are entwined in ways that other senses aren't. So I love that.
Well, it seems like anyone have taken off in the chat?
Yeah, since whimsical is one of the most suggested from the chat, but there's also quite a few like fragrant fans.
Where would you go with whimsical? Let's assume that we're going to honor democracy here, and we're going to go with whimsical. Where would you go with that, especially for someone who's in a position of extraordinary power, like an overlord?
Yeah, that's very interesting because it's like again opening up the mind to like different ideas and interpretation. Because like if I think of an overlord and I think of whimsical, they're not two things that I would usually bring into the same sphere. Like if I think of whimsical, I think probably like in my mind I have ideas or concepts that are probably, if not the far opposite, or like but like a quite far from what an overlord would be. I would think probably most stereotypically about the dogmatic character, like something is very rigid, something is very structured. So whimsical, it kind of gives me this, going with the flow and just kind of like unexpected and funky and weird, but in a very different way. So maybe a whimsical overlord could be someone who's very capricious, or like someone who's very spontaneous, but that's probably not very good for someone who's ruling a country.
I immediately thought of Jeff Goldblum's character from Thor Ragnarok, the Grandmaster, whimsical overlord.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's a great example. Or like John Hammond from Jurassic Park too. I think is someone who does not. They don't give off the impression of holding all the reins and all the power, but they do. And there's something about that like kind of the soft power there that is really interesting and can be dangerous, right? Especially when they aren't called. One thing I'm terrified of being a whimsical overlord with the story engine. It's very good to have Miroki as a like level-headed person who will come in, and when I'm like, what if we gave everyone chocolate for the campaign? And she'll be like, well, we are releasing a deck of cards. What if instead we gave them something related to that? Like, it is certainly helpful to have someone else part of the decision-making process. But when you have an unaccountable leader who has whims, that takes you really interesting places. So I like that reading a lot.
It suddenly brought to mind kind of like a Nightmare Before Christmas vibes of like we have taken over Christmas and we're doing it our own way, whatever that means.
Yeah. Love that. All right, well, let's find out more about the Overlord then. And I think another great, like, sort of a world building lesson that I would pull from this, and something that it's one of the reasons that I use prompting decks. But if you don't use a prompting deck, the sort of manual version of doing this is, once you've created a character or setting or something, pick one non-obvious thing, like a detail about it that plays against or pulls in the opposite direction of cliche.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be like, it doesn't need to become definitive of them, but I find that like adding that, it's kind of like for every, like when you make marzipan, master marzipan makers, the story goes anyway, we'll put in one bitter almond for every 99 sweet almonds, and it's that little bit of bitter that gives texture and depth and complexity to marzipan. Yeah, I feel like it's a decent metaphor for like throw something a little bit bitter, so something against the flavor profile in there to make sure that it feels, because the world is not, you know, one flavor. The world is weird and different. People have strange parts of themselves that stick out at odd angles, and I think embrace that.
Absolutely.
All right, Miroki, since you've joined us, you're gonna you take the lead on this one. So this is to catch you up here. We have a wayfinder who is on. They have an agenda or a quest to try to make friends with this warlord character who we're currently exploring.
Ooh.
We know that this wayfinder is trying to recover a lost sextant. We know that they had a messy breakup, a terrible breakup with an exile, and we think that them going into exile may have something to do with the breakup. It may have something to do with the warlord. We're still deciding that. Our wayfinder is also quick to anger, so they have to negotiate with this warlord, we've decided, but we want some tension in how those negotiations could go south if this wayfinder, like if something provokes them. And we're currently thinking that probably the wayfinder is a non-player character who's asking the party for help in like maybe making the journey to the overlord, maybe in like winning them over. And there could be some fun tension in the party trying to decide if they trust the wayfinder's intentions or not. Because they can be a little bit volatile, because they're experiencing a lot emotionally right now. It would be interesting to see if the party ends up siding with them or not. And we're now fleshing out the warlord. So do they have a background where they disappeared for years? An agenda where they're trying to bring about an event. A trait where they have a notable pet, and we pull out a creature card. Or a trait where they are always in a rush.
A whimsical overlord who is always in a rush. That's like, seems like these heavily contrasting characteristics, where in one hand they're like, I dream, but the dream must happen now. However, I think having a notable pet is something I think would be fun, given that we haven't brought upon like a familiar yet. And I think this, like, someone who's an overlord should most certainly have some sort of pet familiar that is by their side and maybe whispers tidings of the cities and comings and goings to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm totally here for it. And I can already feel if we were talking about control, my control self is already like, I think I know what that notable pet should be, and I will control the like cards for a creature until it gives me what I want. But I know that's not the situation here.
You gotta respect the heart of the cards. So final choice then is,
let's go with a notable pet. Yes.
Pet.
All right, here we go.
I'm all here for pets. In my arcane compendium, I'm not very, like, I don't normally create creatures and stuff like that because it's not like my specialty. But again, it was one of the things that I tested myself with a deck, and I made an expansion. It's just magical companions, exactly, because I think everyone should have a fucky little weird thing running around them all the time.
When I looked at your campaign, I know that's the central image of the cards that you have is this blue jay in this rough shirt, and I loved it so much. I was like, I have never seen something like this in a long time. We see a lot of, you know, animal creatures being humanized in some ways on two legs with a particular effort, but we rarely see like the bird head, and if it's a bird head, it's rarely a blue jay. And that just like brought so much joy to my life, especially. Yeah.
It's one of my favorites. And it was one of my patrons specifically said bird folk, blue jay. So it was one of them who said like, let's make this. And I was just like, yes, so fun. Yeah. And yeah, it's still one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, it's all about like the right amount of specificity does so much for cementing the world in detail, and then the right amount of pulling back and like, well, what does it mean to have a blue jay companion? That's something the player can decide, and that's room for them to create. Love that balance. Well, I think in honor of the compendium here, which you can find at bit.ly/arcane compendium, why don't you choose what the pet's going to be?
Yes.
So here's our first creature card. Fox, griffin, ooze, or owl?
This is very interesting. I think we can go. The first two that sent out to me are the griffin and the owl. Owls are amazing, and I love them. And I would put an owl in everything because they're just amazing. The griffin would be also very interesting because, like, it gives us two options. So the owl could be kind of like the quirky, maybe a bit annoying, or maybe very cute little thing, whilst the griffin is like the big elegant beast, and like they could be like kind of like the show off move from the overlord.
Right.
Hi, look at my beautiful pet griffin. Like, it's not really an animal that you would like. It's kind of like the our fantasy version of the tiger and the king's place, but also at the same time, maybe it's a very messy, silly griffin who's just screaming all the time and is just annoying everyone. So it's just like a very obnoxious griffin, and the overlord is not very happy about it. But maybe it's a family thing. Maybe they have to have a griffin because it's their emblem. But this is the one that came out of the egg. They're stuck with it.
I love this stuck with it idea. I know for me, I was immediately thinking, we have a whimsical overlord who clearly bought an exotic pet they have no idea how to take care of or what its care needs are. And there's this like poor griffin that is like, I was made to rend armies asunder and defend the mountains, and I'm stuck with this friggin' like Willy Wonka character who like mostly got me as a joke, but now has to find a way to incorporate me.
Yeah, they dress it like in stupid things.
Yeah, put a hat on it.
Let's do it. Let's roll with Griffin.
All right, we're doing Griffin.
Poor Griffin.
Connor, this one's coming at you. We're gonna learn more about our overlord. Bonk. Here we go. This overlord, are they of unknown birth or lineage? Do they have an agenda to recover from an ended relationship, breakups all around? A trait where they frequently travel to a location. Don't know why. We can answer that later. Or a trait where they have an unusual, unpleasant, or coarse voice.
I think the two that call out to me are unpleasant or coarse voice. I really tune into people's voices, and those are always really interesting to me. And then the other one is the recovering from an ended relationship, just because it connects with our main protagonist there. Maybe that's something they bond over, is this ended relationship. I think I'm going to lean toward the ended relationship. That's what's calling out to me.
Love it. Yeah, I definitely see. Yeah, I see that working. I have questions. I'm asking interesting questions of myself when I read the frequently travels to a location one. So I might pull a move here where I'm going to corner tech, so we can do both of those.
Okay.
And also I want to get a little location in the mix here. So yeah, Miroki, this one's coming your way. Where do they have to go to? And I think it's gonna like there's inherently a question of like someone who like frequently, I don't know if it's like pilgrimage or like that's where their doctor is, like but I want to figure out why this person needs to go there often and why they don't stay or live there, right? With that sort of lens in mind. Oh, sorry, you cut out for me there.
Oh, sorry, I just said, and do they use the sextant to get to that location?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yes. What if they have the sextant, and what if the sextant is the only way to navigate to this spot? I think that would be really, really interesting. Okay, so the location that they go to frequently can be a synod or synod. I've only ever read it. Don't know how to say it out loud. I'll be fully honest about that. A lodge, a heath, or a homestead. Miroki, are any of these tickling your fancy?
Remind me the prompt that leads to the location.
So this is where the warlord travels to frequently. We don't know why they go there frequently. We don't know why they don't stay there. But yeah.
We don't know why. See, the interest, like, if they're whimsical and like, I guess the more whimsical that I'm calling on them, the negative connotation for that is that they're irresponsible. And what if they travel to a lodge all the time because they're just like, I'm a leader now, and leaders, they should just like have summer houses and go on vacations, and I'm just hanging out at the summer lodge or winter lodge all the time, and I'm shirking my duties, and yeah.
So it's interesting. You're treating that as like it makes sense for the whimsical person, and it becomes a place of like retreat, or the frequency is because of like running away or fear to engage or not wanting to do the job. Yeah, that's not a dimension that I saw, but I like that a lot. I find that's really interesting.
I'm also of the opinion that lodge is a good one, but I had a completely different association with lodge. For me, as a big Twin Peaks fan, I immediately thought of the Black Lodge, this dark alternate world.
Yeah.
Why does this leader want to slip there? Well, because it's whimsical. It's a weird place, a strange place to get away to. Same end result, just different association with the word lodge.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think we're all voting lodge here, and the chat has our back.
And actually, Connor, it's interesting that you bring this up as Peter's tucking it. I just made the assumption. I'm like, yes, the lodge. And it was something that. I don't know if it answered. I know like people kept asking. There were a few times people kept asking us on our various live streams, like, how do you come through your creative process? How do you make the decisions, or how do you lock in? And sometimes it's like, well, in some ways we don't, right? There's clearly so many different ways to interpret the terminology or the language and the vocabulary of a certain thing. And so even when we create this one lore cluster, four of us can write completely different tales and stories on it because of the way we interpret it. And frankly, like maybe the answer is just there's no right way. As creatives, we are talking about eschewing the rules from the time we launched Lore Masters Deck, and we're talking about like our guidebook, and everyone's asking, how do you use it, and we always we're like, well, here's like sort of the way to use it, but then here's the 8,000 ways to break the rules of using it. And we were already talking about rule breaking earlier and how we encourage people to rule break. It's because in the end, creativity inherently doesn't have rules. And instead of, for all our listeners who are always looking at getting started and doing something, maybe the best advice we can certainly say to you is just say, like, don't get too locked up thinking you're doing the correct thing or not about the how-tos, because we all have our own version of a how-to when it comes to creating like lore and stories and world building and whatnot, because we all are all just like, it's built on our human experiences.
Yeah, it is so much better to start badly than it is to not start.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, just
finish not perfect. Yes.
Yeah, finish not perfect. Yeah, absolute mantra. Yeah, I feel that, and it's interesting because like no matter how many times I think I've gotten past that mindset, I still catch myself in the okay, but what if I overthought this for a week and tried to make it perfect before I even start? And
it's definitely something that applies a lot to world building, because it's like, you create the character or the country or the reign, and then you create the system, like the type of government and stuff like that, and then all the gods, and then all the gods and all the legends and all the things and all the stuff, and it just at some point the world is alive enough that it doesn't have to be the entire history of human and otherworldly existences of your universe that you have to map out.
Yeah, for sure. And perhaps from a career, like just from a very pragmatic standpoint for creatives out there, and I think part of the reason why we probably hold ourselves back is we're always afraid that people won't love our work or that it's not correct for the world at the time.
If people don't love my work, they don't love me, and therefore I'm not worthy of love. I don't think you understand.
But let me give some real world examples. I remember, when I was writing my music at one point thinking, well, these intervals are not correct for opera metal. They should all be done in this style that is inherently very usually Irish or European centric. And this interval just sounds too similar to, let's say, like Asian, like Chinese pentatonics in music. And this is, and why would I want to incorporate this? And then like a couple years later, my favorite bands are using frickin' Asian pentatonics in their music, or they're beginning to incorporate these particular instrumentals, or the way their lyrics sounds less and less in that kind of just like, oh, here's my kind of ballady style structure. And I was like, well, damn. And then I remember when I was writing fiction, similar to Eren, my 15 unfinished novels that someday will make it out there as bestsellers in the world. I wanted to write something that featured Asian dominant characters, but in Canadian history. And I thought, well, no one's gonna really want that because everyone thinks Canadian history is inherently European and white, and they're not gonna think that they're gonna challenge my historical accuracy about Asian people. And the true story about that is that it's completely untrue. There actually were thousands of Chinese laborers in Canada, but no one thought about it. But the way it's portrayed in the media, so focusing on just how it's portrayed in the media, and now there's like some freaking like Western TV show, and I cannot remember the name of it. My partner is watching it right now, or was watching it, but it's like a Western, full-on Western, like gun-tone shooting, and it's predominantly Asian characters, and they're like doing, Asian martial arts and flips and stuff while in a Western. And I was like, oh, well, and everyone loves this. I was like, oh, clearly I was just shooting myself in the foot all this time. It will always come out there. There is no wrong answer. And if you do, you might just stop yourself from becoming the next prolific author out there.
Yeah. If it's not a niche already, it means that probably there is space for you to create it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can also give yourself permission to separate mentally the act of writing and the act of publishing. Because like publishing is one of those things where you can't control whether or not the appetite for it is right. You can't control the gatekeepers. You can't control the biases that are going to be in play against you. And like you don't know if your thing's going to make it to the point where it's published, even if it's good. The thing that you can control is the writing. The thing that you can control is the creation. And like one of the drums that I beat like loud and regularly is as much as you can make your creative process something that you do because you love it, because it is inherently fulfilling as an act, in the same way that you'd brew a cup of tea and that would fulfill you and make you happy and bring value to your day in life. If you can approach your creative work that way, and then figure out how you sell it, and that does matter, right? Like being able to eat and live off of your work matters. Being able to be respected and feel appreciated for the work you do matters. All those things matter. But if you can start from a place of, I do this because I inherently care about it and it matters to me, and the joys of like a well-turned phrase, or the joys of having created a world, if that's the fuel that's powering your creative journey, I do really think that you will get so much further. And you have to learn to balance that with the realities of being a professional creative, for sure, like absolutely for sure. But yeah, I do recommend like that. I think Eren, you mentioned it earlier when you're talking about like following people where they get excited. If they get excited about something in the story, or that's what they like attach to, then like let that be the story.
Yeah.
And doing that for yourself, basically. Yeah. As a stakeholder. Sorry, Peter's monologue finished. It's something I care a lot about.
That's great.
I think we can bring this prompt home by extending one more of these things. Do we want to, and this is throwing it to our panelists here, the Lodge, the Griffin, the Sextant, or the Exile, what do we want to learn more about?
Maybe the Sextant would be an interesting...
Yeah, let's deal with the Sextant.
Because it's so far it seems like it's the glue that is bringing all of these things together.
Yeah, completely agree.
So and it's the only thing that we don't have too much on. We just know that it's a thing, and then it has been lost, and it might be with the Overlord, but we don't know anything else.
Let's learn more about it. All right. So the Sextant. We're going to start off with our wild card here. So yeah, Eren, let's have you start with this one. Is this a patient sextant, an esteemed sextant, a secluded sextant, a hypnotic sextant, a granular sextant, a sinewy sextant, a predestined sextant, or a deceiving sextant?
Ooh, okay. So I think so. Predestined is kind of like what I would think would be the classic choice, because there's always kind of like in fantasy there's often this theme, which kind of makes me want to stay away from it, because it's like it's the thing that you were destined to have this, my child, and type of thing. It's interesting, but it's not the one that I'm tempted by. I'm very interested in the deceiving, and I'm also interested in the secluded option. I definitely want to stay away from the scenery sextant because I don't even want to think about what that means.
Yeah, as someone with a very visual artist
It
imagination,
gives me a bit
I
of kind of
imagine-
like body horror,
Yeah.
and I don't want to go there.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, but what about you folks?
For me, it's a toss up between predestined and hypnotic. The idea of predestined for me, I love the idea of a sextant that tells you where you will have gone, not where you're going or where you've been, but where you will have gone. Something that's just a complete hook for me. And the other one is hypnotic, as maybe a sextant that it will tell you where you are going, but it wants to guide you where you need to be. And even if you don't know where you need to be, it's trying to guide you there. So you've got this internal pull of like, I want to go there, but I feel like I should go there.
And there's kind of a deceiving element in there too.
Yeah, there is, or maybe it's hypnotic also because maybe it takes you to the place where it thinks you need to go, but you don't know how you ended up there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and for a wayfinder, that's like an interesting tension, right? Because like their expertise is knowing the route, but with this thing, what they know is the destination, but they don't know the route.
Or what if it's like hypnotic and that is what caused that kind of breakup with the exile as well? Like maybe there was some sort of misunderstanding because the sextant had some sort of hypnotic quality that led something astray and something happened that caused a rift.
Yeah. That's also let's go with hypnotic. Because I think we're all
getting... It sort of implies the possibility that it's sentient in some way, that it's hypnotizing the user to what ends? What is the sextant's motivation?
Yeah, it also, and now like thinking about that, it also gave me kind of like a mermaid vibe, which kind of also ties in with the nautical theme of like is there is a and maybe that also like brings up, as we were saying earlier, like different senses. Like, is it a sound? Is it a smell? Is it like a sensory thing? Is it touching it? Is it a dream state? Like it's interesting how the hypnosis can be an actual like tangible thing, or is it more of like a mental thing? Is the state? Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, and I think that like for a storyteller who's going to be telling a story, this is going to give them a lot they can work with, right? This like mysterious magical sextant that has its own will is something that you can leave them room to play with that. We don't have to decide all ahead what that means. And just answering a quick chat question, are all these prompts exclusively from the Lore Masters deck? So Lore Masters deck, I think, is 90% new prompts and 10% reused ones. And by reused, I mean in, say, the Story Engine deck, we have a deck of agent cards, which are similar to the figure cards. It did not make sense to leave out certain words because they already appeared in that deck. Some words are really important to have for representing, like, say, a student. Student is like a very core type of character that we want to be able to represent. Trying to swerve away from the word into a synonym that would be less effective was something I decided not to do. So I think it's something like 90% all new cues exclusive to the deck and 10% ones that appeared elsewhere and are being reused specifically to make sure that the deck itself is self-contained and rounded out.
Yeah.
Good. Although you can make it... Yeah, you can make it even bigger if you use the lore bridge decks, bridge expansions to Deck of Worlds or Story Engine deck. We have the 2 bridges there unlocked. I think we're looking to unlock hopefully a story world, which obviously doesn't connect to Lore Masters deck, but as one of our stretch goals, we will release kind of like a 3rd bridge deck. Actually, we're pretty close. We have to do it at the 400,000 mark, but we have a story world bridge now, kind of unlock the trifecta of bridges. But yeah, though, you have the opportunity to connect prompts to the old decks, and then you'll just have so many options you won't even know what to do with yourself.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Bridge expansions just add recombinability to the deck in a way that it lets you do a lot. You can stitch together the existing decks that we have with this in a way that you really, really this is the first deck where I stopped being able to do the math to model the number of potential combinations. I got to trillions and then was like, at this point, I don't know why, but like literally just one prompt of just this upright card with 4 cards under it, not including corner tucks, I think I was at the hundreds of billions, and that's not including interconnections. So it's the most recombinable deck we've done and has the most prompts of any deck that we've done. So I'm proud of it for that reason. I think it's going to bear tons and tons of fruit because it is like, yeah, ridiculously reusable. But let's find out some information about the sextant here before we wrap. Who decided on hypnotic? That was Eren. So let's do this one to Connor, and then the next one will be Miroki. So the background of the sextant, that it was lost during a major event, that it was created to prove a point, that it was imbued with the powers of a creature, and we would draw a creature card to round that out, or that it has chemical or alchemical properties.
Man, I am immediately drawn to created to prove a point, especially if that point was incorrect. I think that's the one that really draws to me. I think there's the intentionality behind creating something like a semi-sentient sextant that's visceral. That draws me in. That's the one I like. Any thoughts from anybody else?
Oh, I like that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I trust.
And what is that point? And what is the point of that sextant? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, so there's something that you can do with the deck called a manual override, where rather than following sort of the algorithm, so to speak, of the usual steps, you just decide to cut in and draw a card to fill in a gap that is the exact shape of something you have in mind. We could draw a couple of agent cards, or maybe an agent in a faction, and just look at the agendas and try and figure out what the point is, basically. So look only at agenda types and figure out like what would make sense for this, either the sextant to want or the person who made it. What point were they trying to prove? What were they trying to get to with that? So let's find out. I don't know if this is going to work.
Let's go rogue on screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Go in rogue, and Miroki, this will be your pick. You can tell me to draw more cards if these don't work for you. So we're looking at the agendas here. If any of these also just seem like traits for the object, and you want to just try mixing, matching card types, we can do that too. So it was created to prove a point, and that point involves preventing an apocalyptic event, or agenda where this one probably doesn't work as well. It was created to prove a point of securing a specific artifact, so we need to pull another object card to figure that out. I'll pull a third. Oh, you know what? I'm going to pull one more. I'm going to pull a deity card because I think it'd be interesting if it had like a godlike motivation.
That securing a specific artifact reminds me of sort of like how a lot of children's TV shows eventually go, where it's like, we need to secure the MacGuffin, which also secures this MacGuffin, which also like finds this magical object, which will end the world. We find all the MacGuffins, they will form one giant MacGuffin. So,
Transformer MacGuffin.
Transformer MacGuffin, Yu-Gi-Oh! MacGuffins. I mean, literally all children's shows is collecting all the MacGuffins, which like end up being one giant thing. Okay, let's see. Establish a temple in a location.
Yeah. So
I know. I do not make any money from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Transformers or any of these properties I mentioned. I wish they would. I wish I would. Let's see. Okay. Oh dear.
The demo.
You lost the demo.
Oops.
Yeah.
There you go.
We're the demo now. There we go.
There we go.
They're created to prove a point. Establish a temple in a location. Is a lover of another deity. People who can you turn it, Peter? Well, let's lean into the deity side of things. I am interested in pulling some deity things. Mortal champion or mouthpiece.
Yeah, what if the point that it's trying to prove, here's a pitch of me shooting from the hip just because I'm feeling a little frisson of something here. What if the point it's trying to prove is that like anyone can be the mouthpiece for the gods, or that predestination is really just like choosing. It's just you choosing something, and that like the chosen one narrative is disrupted by like the chosen one chooses himself. And the point of this sextant is that like maybe there is this big story around it being predestined or it being a thing of destiny, and none of that's true. And the point that was proven was like them creating this false rumor so that they could basically show you can engineer a chosen one, and that really all that greatness is like choosing to do the thing.
That's actually interesting because we talk so much about like kings often being chosen by God and they're the mouthpieces of God and they're doing God's work, or even priests, right? Like it's like we are the ones who are God's work. Actually, it's funny. I was you folks don't know Connor and Eren, but I was just in Greece doing very unrelated stuff to Lore Master's deck. But we visited the archaeological ruins of the city Dion, which was the religious center where they worship Zeus and all the gods, and they actually spoke about how the priests would often be like the only men to impregnate a lot of the women in a particular region because they were like the conduit of God, so they were all having God's children, but only if the priests do it. And it's all these ideas of like only certain factions or certain figures could be the mouthpiece of God either by birthright or whatever, and this idea of like that it could be anyone being a moral champion could disrupt a whole system. So I'm all for that. I'm all for that, Peter.
I like disrupting systems, and yeah. It's funny how, like you said, like the king destined by God or ordained by the church or whatever. It's like it's amazing how the person who has all the money and pays the church the most money is the person that the church chose as the person who is in charge. Like what an amazing coincidence that is.
Oops, yeah. That happened again.
and I think that this choice of the champion or like being it or not being it, it could also then tie back to the overlord figure in a to the whimsical overlord interesting way.
Yeah, because if they just kind of decide that they're the chosen one, we'll have to deal with whatever that means. If they don't or can't, or like, actually, I think the thing that's also really interesting here for a storytelling opportunity for tabletop RPG is the sextant clearly is going to be. I think there's going to be a moment of choosing who gets it or like who is the ordained one, and I think that leaving that open to like, do the players want it to go to an NPC? Does one of the players want to take it? Does a player end up developing a specific relationship with it because it is kind of sentient and like that brings them closer to it? Like, I feel like that is a space where players can put a lot of meaning collaboratively. That would be really interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah,
I like holding that space. Cool. So we're gonna give it this point or whatever is somehow connected to mortal champion or mouthpiece. We can decide what that means later. We're already off-roading here and making up our own rules. And then we'll do one more objects prompt. And we'll just make this a whole group discussion. This will be the last one. So the sextant, a background where it was created as a complement to another object, which we would draw from the object stack. A background where it was once restored by a figure or faction, so it had been damaged in some way. A trait where it has perception-affecting properties, which we're kind of getting into with the hypnosis already.
Yeah.
And then a trait where its aesthetics are inspired by the stars, sun, or moon. And here's a great example of this is an alpha deck. There should be a comma. There should be a comma right there, and there isn't. That's why we hire proofreaders.
5 years from now, it would be a collectible edition item, the error card.
There you go.
I think to me, I like the aesthetics inspired by the sun and the stars and the moon. I think also because it ties back to a nautical idea of the stars guiding you. So maybe there is a shifting thing, or maybe specific constellations or specific things that appear on this thing that maybe are engraved on this thing, or maybe like when this hypnotic influence takes a hold of you, maybe you see these stars, or like you understand this map that is inscribed on this artifact of some sort. So I like that, but I'm very open to. I think that there was the other one that the perception affecting properties is the one that we kind of have already unlocked with the hypnotic, so it could either strengthen that or like we can go in a different direction. But I'm happy to go where things are, what people think we should go.
I was really drawn to the perception affecting properties idea, and the idea that if this thing already sort of has a new definition of sort of creating. You're talking about the last card, wording on the last card, or the other aspect to the sextant was the exact wording there on the previous card. Created to
prove a point.
Yeah, created to prove a point, right? So the idea on that one, like the idea of it altering someone's perception in a way that they see themselves differently, because they're the chosen ones now. And I love the idea of people being able to break out of their own self-perceptions. And if this sextant is creating a hero, then when you accept the sextant, you see yourself in a different light. That's where I went with it.
I really like that. Yeah, you've talked me into it. I changed my vote as each of you was talking. And especially for if what we're trying to do is break the usual pattern of king making or sovereign making in this world, then that's then someone who learns to like starts to see themselves that way. What does that mean? And for good and bad, right? Like that could be a thing where they start to see themselves as like being empowered, but also they start to see themselves as like being angry towards people who get in the way of their goal. Or,
yes, absolutely.
like entitlement can come with that. There's a lot. There's so much you can do with that. Miroki, any of these options tickling your fancy before we lock this in?
I'm sure there are. However, being the person who's staring at some back-endy things, I realize our live dropped off the main page, so I'm trying to make sure that code gets adjusted.
I can get that back up. Yeah, if you can I'll work on that.
Okay. I was like, let Peter do the. I was like, I'll let Peter and Eren and Connor do the things while I do the not so fun things. I mean,
yeah, you got it. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look a little bit closer and see what the other. So the thing is that earlier when Eren was talking about the aesthetics, I was already attracted to the aesthetics itself. Maybe that's me wanting to be simple, but sometimes like I like adding a few. I know at least when I've been playing with Lore Master's deck, I always try and pick like 2 or 3 sides that trigger something that would take us further into something. But sometimes it's okay to pick a couple of things that are simpler but are just like qualifying the particular item so that I can start like creating some visual cues for myself of what I want it to be. Because sometimes like I know I'm a little bit. I find that when I'm creating things, I love having visuals associated to it, but a lot of times I struggle with what the physical like aesthetic of something will be, and it ends up just being something really ugly or silly. It's like it always ends up being like some, I don't know, gray haze of a blob of something in my mind, and getting the opportunity to kind of have a visual trigger is appealing to me.
Yeah. I can totally see that.
So that's for me. I kind of like focusing on the aesthetics of the stars, sun, and moon.
Which is
can we corner attack it?
So we already have all our corners used up, but you know what we're gonna do here? We are
because it's the other.
But we're gonna, because we know that the point being proven is about the mouthpiece, we're just gonna double that one up there. So we know that this clarifies that, and then we're gonna corner attack this, and we can have it all.
Breaking the law.
Breaking the law, having it all. Don't call the cops on me. I love this. And yeah, I love my thinking was the Sextant is almost like a pop-up book orrery. So like one of those mechanical models of the universe where like all things like you it opened and all of a sudden these like rings pop out and all the things are circling. And that the hypnotic is almost like this mobile motion. Or like maybe it projects starlight, and like you need to have it in the right place for all of the things to hit in the right spot to like map or whatever. But yeah, there's so much. I agree. Like having a visual cue, it does so much for starting to think about like how you're going to describe it or introduce it to people or where it might live. This was so much fun. We have created a fun little piece of deployable lore that we could drop in here, where there's enough room for the players to find themselves and for a storyteller to create a story with questions that they can answer themselves. And I love that.
The best question is who is occupying which character now? Which of us 4 is going to become each thing? Like, Peter, are you the overlord because you mentioned something about being the overlord? I guess all of us, I mean, except for me. Eren's overlord of the arcane compendium and and Connor's the overlord of wolves. That actually sounds really epic. I know
it's a great title.
Connor, overlord of wolves.
I'll take it.
And like if you hear Eren, the overlord of the arcane, and Connor, the overlord of wolves, and Peter, the overlord of the engine or the story engine, and I'm just something in the background. But sorry, that was me just being like, now we're gonna play this TTRPG setting. Which one of us are gonna occupy what?
You can be the overlord of responsible financial decisions that let us stay in business long enough to keep putting out good creative products that help people. That we should all be so lucky to have.
Brain up and working.
Yeah, but I want to say thank you so much to our panelists, Eren, Connor. This was an absolute joy. Eren, can you tell the people where they can find you online and what project you're working on right now?
Yes, so you can find me at Eren Angiolini, so the name that you see written on my screen, on Twitter and on Instagram, or at erenangiolini.com. And I am currently running Eren's Arcane Companion of Characters and Backer Kit, which is a system-agnostic deck of fantasy TTRPGs characters, and with cool art that I drew, and also cool background that I also drew. Written, not drew. But yeah, it's online now. We've reached our main stretch goal, my main goal, and we're going for the stretch goals. There is lots of new things. There is expansions to unlock, and more cards and upgrades. So yeah, come hang out with us and make some cool characters. We are actually in the process of creating a character with the backers of the project. So so far we know it's a mixed kind of like martial mage classy thing, and we are now deciding what vibe they have. So if there's kind of like a cheerful positive character, or maybe like a mysterious one, or a villainous one. So if that seems interesting to you, you can join us and create cool stuff together.
Love it. And whether you're watching this on the replay or you're watching it live, if you click through to the YouTube page, we have links to Connor's active project and Erin's active project in the description, video description. So go check it out and click through. We know we have a chat full of people who love to collaborate on creating characters and coming up with different creative ideas. So we'd love to see you come over to that project and support. And Connor, where can the people find you and what are you working on?
Well, first, congrats, Erin, on your hitting your funding goal. That's great. We also hit our funding goal over on Wolves. So Wolves is currently on Kickstarter, and will be for the next 3 weeks. I think we're just finished our first week of 4, and then on socials, pretty much anywhere you go, I'm Coyote and Crow or Coyote and Crow Games. If you do a search for that, it's going to turn me up. I'm on all the things. And then our website is coyoteandcrow.net, and that's where you can find out, all the stuff on the role-playing game, our wiki, our language stuff, all the stuff that comes along with the RPG, as well as links to our Discord there as well. And our Discord's fantastic.
Awesome. And congrats to both Connor
and congrats to you as well.
Yeah.
This was a great time.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Miroki,
Yes.
before you send us home, I want to pull out, because I know how much you hate puns, I want to pull out my favorite pun from the chat. The Overlord.
You know what? It was adorable. Okay, this one was one that I actually thought was kind of cute. So, yes, Marcy, thank you for giving me a pun that I wouldn't completely scream at. Yes, it's everyone's favorite pastime throughout this entire campaign is what puns can people pull out to make Miroki cringe the most. And you know what? If it makes you guys all happy, please keep doing so. Give us all the Lore Masters deck puns. Maybe I'll find a way to compile them all into one community forum at the very end, just like all the puns that have been existing throughout the campaign. Of course, we're Lore Masters deck as part of the story engine. It's an amazing amazing card piece that you can use to build lore clusters to flesh out the world, as you've seen for the last 120 minutes, to kind of flesh out the worlds that you're building, the stories you're creating, or in this case, TTRPG settings. You can find us on storyenginedeck.com/lore, of course, on backer kit as well. We are in the final, I thought it was 5, but it says 4 now on the page. And final 4 days, we're going to end this Friday. We have many more amazing live streams basically all week. We have one happening tomorrow at 2:30 p.m., which is talking 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, which is talking about world building or world breaking. And I believe our special guest for that is Jordan Shively. If my memory, yes, I was trying to
we're gonna quickly build a world with you, and then we're gonna break it. We're gonna use the events deck and just throw a bunch of bad things at it and see how it falls apart. It's gonna be a fun time.
Yes.
Most of these live streams are designed to look at a specific mechanic or reveal a function deck. This is entirely me wanting to entertain myself by making a sandcastle and then watching the ocean come in and the tide come in and smash it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, and then we have one on Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, where we'll be joined by Megan McKay. We're going to do some live drawing using our prompts. So we're going to create some art while doing prompts. And then, of course, we have our big wrap party on Friday starting at 9 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to live stream with you all the way to midnight, where we can celebrate the wrap of the deck. So please take an opportunity to join us if you love Lore Masters deck, Erin's Arcane Compendium, and of course Connor's Wolves game. Do share that with your community. It's all of us gathering together is what really makes this is what makes all of us thrive, right? Like the heartbeat of being creatives is the opportunity to collaborate and not compete with each other. And that if we lift each other up, that's someone said it a lot better than me. This is my version of saying, I don't know, something about like rising tide, everyone gets, like, all ships rise with the rising tide, or so the saying goes. This is how we all kind of build each other up as a community. And please take the opportunity to share with your friends, your family, and as I said, your enemies, because if we share with our enemies, we will make them better as a result. So yes, thank you all so much for joining our live today. You've all been, as always, such an incredible audience. Thank you again, Connor and Eren, for joining us and bringing all your creative juices to the forefront and getting wacky together.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the deck of puns as your next.
Oh, April Fools for sure. April Fools. We're doing it. We're doing it. I don't care how impractical, or I don't care how much of a misallocation of resources.
First subscriber.
Love it. Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, we'll leave you all. Thank you so much for participating in the chat. Thanks to our panelists. And
thank you, everyone.
All right.
Take care.